Welcome to Edius Editing for News, and today I thought we'd look at color grading or correcting shots using pre-made effects that are available via a download link below. On my screen you can see that I have a range of dubious looking shots, some better than others. And on the scopes on the side here, the vector scope, the round one, and the waveform monitor, the square one on the right, you should be able to see some key elements relating to each one of these shots. The first thing to note for each one of these interviews is the skin tone line on the vector scope, which should be pointing at about 11 o'clock if we're looking on a clock on the vector scope, just before 11 o'clock. So it looks like everybody is roughly pointing in the correct direction. So their skin tone seems to be white balanced correctly. But you'll notice that there's different saturation. So this person has quite a pale complexion. So the saturation represented by how far this blob in the middle of the vector scope goes indicates that there is not much saturation happening in this picture. The other lobe or stick hanging down here is the blue, which indicates the background. Moving through these shots, we can see there are different amounts of contrast available in each of the faces. Now the contrast is represented by the waveform monitor on the side here, on the right. And you can see that the black would be at the bottom where 0% is, and white is up at 100%. Sometimes the white exceeds 100%. As you can see here, this is no good. We can't have colour exceeding white, otherwise you get very strange artifacts when the pictures go to air. So we need to target all our whites landing on the 100% line. The other thing to note is that our faces should be exposed at around 60 to 65%. And this face is correctly exposed, as is the one prior to it. You can see here, this reddy orangey blob is our face. But if we go down to something very bright, like this, our face is up here, which is no good. Now I'm going to correct this shot first. What I can see here is that the pedestal or black level is very high at around 10 or 12%, and we want to bring that down somewhat. So I have a pre-made effect to choose from. Here I have FS7 Brisbane contrast mixer. I can put that on there. And immediately the shot becomes brighter, and yes, his face does become brighter, but the overall contrast has changed. It has stretched between the dark part of his face and the bright part of his face. If we double click on the filter, and I'll drag the filter over here, you'll see that it's a mix or blend filter, and I can dial between what it was originally to what it is now, so I can accentuate the contrast. Now that I've exposed his face up a little more, I shall apply some contrast crush, which is applying more darkness to the black regions, as you can see here. That was with it off, and that's with it mixed in. So now the middle range of his face should be around 65%, with some highlight poking up a little higher, but now with more contrast at the bottom. Before, after. Moving on to the next shot. This shot is quite good already. The face has a reasonable amount of contrast. You can see furrows in his forehead and darkness in his mouth. But again, the pedestal is quite high. So what we can do to fix that, make sure we have the correct clip selected, the FS7 contrast clutch, and that immediately brings down the picture so that now there is more black at the bottom. If we double click on that to open and drag the slider across from our blend filter, you can see we can accentuate the black. We don't really need a lot of extra black, just a little bit to bring it down halfway. We don't really want deep blacks on a person's face that make them look too old. What's wrong with this shot? Well, it has correct white values, and his face seems to be in the correct spot around here. So why don't we just add more contrast? Let's try the FS7 contrast crush. And we've cut through that grey haze to improve the contrast of our image. Let's have a look at the before version and after. On the next shot, with the very pale skinned person, if I apply too much contrast here onto this shot, then I get very deep shadows under his eyes, which I don't want. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to choose something similar, Interview Contrast Enhance V2. If I apply that to this clip, what you'll notice is that his eyelids are still the same brightness, but the background now has all changed. So there is more relative contrast. In other words, there's more difference between him and the background. This is before and this is after. So we didn't have to change his face appreciably, but just change the surrounding contrast, because his exposure was right and his saturation is actually pretty good because his tie looks about correct. Moving on to the next shot. This looks quite good, however, it's underexposed. As we can see, the face is below the 50% line. It really should be up in the middle here, between 50 and 75%. So, if we apply the FS7 HDR mixer, or High Dynamic Range mixer, which tries to repair the image automatically, this pulls up the dark parts and pushes down the bright parts of the image. It's quite good for equalizing most shots. Again, this has that sort of grey feeling. If we look over here at our waveform monitor, it's all set up at about 12% or 15%. So let's apply the contrast crush here. It seems to have made his face quite dark though, around the mouth and under the eyes. Let's remove that contrast crush and try the Interview Contrast Enhance. So we'll put that on this shot, and that has made all of the background darker and brought all of its pedestal down, but it's left his face up a little bit higher. So now he doesn't look underexposed. You could apply the Brisbane contrast mixer on top of that to apply more relative level. We'll wind that back to 0, and we're just lifting the exposure somewhat around his face. Face dips down here. This is his white shirt on the side, and it looks much nicer than the alternative, which was that. This face is difficult because the background tone or relative brightness is similar to the face. If we look here on our waveform monitor, everything is in a line, so this will be quite challenging to improve. Let's first of all try and get the brightness back into the image. We'll put down an FS7 Briz contrast mixer so the whole image gets stretched out. Dial that back, slide it up till we get the face in the correct place. Okay, and now we'll add the FS7 contrast crush. So that has brought the blacks down. This shot has very, very bright backgrounds, which are not ideal, and a quite dark face. If we have a look here, the face is underexposed at probably 40%. So let's try and fix this with our FS7 HDR mixer. Let's just put it on and see if it tries to correct those things. Instantly her face has come up much brighter and the background has been ducked down somewhat, and the relative contrast is much better. If we apply more contrast to her face, I'm afraid that it will enhance her lines around her face. Let's try that first. It has somewhat made it darker under her eyes. Let's remove that and try the Interview Contrast Enhance instead. That's much better. Now it looks like she has fill light on her face, whereas the background has become much darker. Moving on to this shot, you'll notice that the ute in the background is very bright, and that the waveform monitor shows us that the white values are actually exceeding 100%. So this is not correct. When this goes to air, the grass will turn into a green blob and the face will turn into an orange blob, and it will look very peculiar. And this is the reason why our talent looks quite overexposed. Let's first of all fix that by adding a 20% exposure reduction so that everything becomes legal. You can see here it's all been squashed down by 20%. And our blacks are still correct. Let's try and fix the fact that her face is a little bit overexposed. As we can see here, it goes quite bright on the side. She's roughly correct, but a little bit too overexposed. We can try applying the Perth decontrast mixer. We'll apply that here. Again, you can slide this in and out as you require. You can lose all the contrast, or you can just subtly dial back the exposure. This is before and this is after. Now this shot looks pretty much perfect to me. Perfect exposure, nice background, nice and soft. However, the background could have a little bit more contrast to lift her face from it. So let's apply the Interview Contrast Enhance to this shot. It's instantly slightly more contrasty background. This is the before and after. This interview shot was shot at night, and I think that the talent could pop a little bit more off the background. So let's try the Interview Contrast Enhance. And that's instantly dropped the background off. It's retained the same amount of fill light on the talent, and so he's still exposed correctly. But it's made the background a little bit more contrasty and interesting. Now if I do the same thing to this person, Interview Contrast Enhance, you'll notice that his shirt gets very dark. The background's fallen off too, but because he already has a dark complexion, it's probably too much. If we open up the chrominance tool, we can drag this value down so that we retain some of the black values. If we go all the way down, it pretty much returns to what it was before. When we start sliding it up, we start to see his shirt disappear, just as it drops down. On the waveform monitor, you can see the change as I raise and lower that. So we just want to make the shirt a little bit more black and a little less grey. There we go.